Gold mines. Let me explain. Hollywood has always been reliant on trends or pop culture in order to cash in the box office, or as I like to call it, Hollywood gold mines. Hollywood gold mines have always been a thing, and they manifest themselves in different ways, like the insane overtaking of the Western genre, or gangster films. Or in the new Hollywood era, when Hollywood started making youth picks, which were essentially films that catered to the young adult audience, and held rebellious themes in their films. This was to cash in into the rebellious mindset that was at the time pretty prominent. More recently, Hollywood has been mining at the biggest gold mine for over a decade: comic book movies. Comic book movies already existed before Marvel, but since the introduction of the cinematic universe concept, aka the CU in the MCU, Hollywood seems to have stumbled into a big gold mine. It's like if Sam Raimi and Sony found a huge nugget of gold with their Spider-Man trilogy, and Marvel found the whole fucking cave. Comic book movies have been Hollywood's cash cow for the longest time. It spawned in the horrendous concept of the cinematic universe, and this led to all the studios to try to get at least one superhero movie in their resume. I'm not saying this is certain, but with the phase 4 of Marvel and the shaking transition of DC along with the failing box office, it is totally possible that the comic book movies are on their way out, and something else is on their way in. Video game movies. What a beautiful concept. Modern video games actually evolved from movies from a visual storytelling perspective and even the techniques of gameplay, such as the first-person shooter genre with its point-of-view shots. In the essay paper Gaming by the author and professor of the Department of Media, Culture and Communication, Alexander Galloway makes the difference between a POV shot and a subjective shot. A POV shot is no different to a match cut to what a character sees. Essentially, it's putting the camera into the character's eyes and lets us see what the character objectively sees with their eyes. A subjective shot, however, is when you combine POV shots and add a psychological factor to this. Take for instance, Phantom Thread by Paul Thomas Anderson, when the character Reynolds imagined the phantom of his mother while he was sick. Objectively speaking, no other character should have seen this figure, yet our protagonist did. That's the subjective shot. Galloway states that sometimes POV shots and subjective shots can be interlinked and mixed to tell a story. So, back to video games. The point of view gameplay you see from a first-person shooter are derived from POV and subjective shots from film. So we've gone a full circle with movies trying to adapt video games, with video games being inspired by movies in the first place. And it cannot be denied, studios have done a horrible job adapting video games, which is kind of hilarious. Let me explain why. Comic books are still drawings, so you can still write out and adapt the comic book to a screenplay and talk to the cinematographer in order to convey what you're going to show. What's funny is that the video games are sort of different. The story's already written, the visuals are sort of already shot. There's still a lot of work into adapting other forms of media into film. Video games are more adaptable since most of them still follow the 3-act structure. Not only that, video games are already fleshed out narratively and visually, and Hollywood still manages to mess it up. There seems to be 2 types of video game movies. I'd classify trivia video games as movies with video games as the backbone of the movie, but not the full driving factor. More recently, Tetris has been a trivia video game movie. Other movies in this category would be Ready Player One, Wreck-It Ralph, Pixels, Free Guy. These are movies that make video game references, but the video games are not the main driving factor in the narrative. Tetris is actually a biopic. Ready Player One is actually a story about corporations versus gamers. Wreck-It Ralph is actually about Ralph's story arc into becoming someone bigger than a simple role. Free Guy is actually about the philosophy of free will. And Pixels it's an Adam Sandler movie. Once again, the video game references are the backbone, but they're not the center of these movies. These movies are generally more digestible and more mainstream. The movies we're actually focusing on is straight adaptations. Uncharted, Super Mario, Warcraft, Mortal Kombat, Resident Evil, Super Mario, Angry Birds, Detective Pikachu, Tomb Raider, Sonic, Super Mario, and last but not least, Super Mario. These are the movies that are having a hard time actually being a critical and box office success. Hollywood has infinite amounts of ideas with video games, they're just having a bad time adapting them. And the thing is, there isn't a universal problem to diagnose video game movies. If it isn't the critics completely shitting on the filmmaking, it's the fans shitting on the adaptation. Studios have to cater to both fans and the mainstream audiences in order to make ends meet. Recently, movies such as Sonic, Angry Birds, and Mario have proven to be box office and audience success. These movies, however, are mainly targeting the family demographic. It is easier to make fun, adventurous movies than to adapt a video game with a serious tone. Notice how the failed video game movies tend to be those targeted towards adults, such as Tomb Raider, Mortal Kombat, Agent 47, Assassin's Creed, Super Mario. Studios seem to put people who have no passion for the video games at hand, but when they do, it benefits them. Look at Sonic and Detective Pikachu for example. Both films adapt video games in a refreshing and unique way. You can tell the people working behind these movies actually care as opposed to yeah. Another problem is that video games sometimes have insanely large storylines that span up to 20 hours, and these 20 plus hour odysseys generally have to be squeezed into 2 hours or less. But I think Hollywood has found a solution for this though. They convert these video games into episodes. It seems Sony might be onto something with the live action aspect of video games. Look, I personally don't like the Uncharted movie, but you cannot deny it was a box office success. Sony right now is following this success with the adaptation of their game Ghost of Tsushima with the John Wick director. I have no clue if Chad is a Ghost of Tsushima fan, but he is a good filmmaker and he can make something new and refreshing with the video game genre. But the thing is, they have to take it a step further and have respect for the video game as well. This is the opposite of what the Monster Hunter adaptation did, with having an insanely realistic portrayal of the universe, where the protagonist is a soldier from the US transported into another universe. Mario was an insane success, and it was bound to happen. With the success of The Last of Us, Mario, and good reception of video games here and there such as Sonic and Detective Pikachu, I think studios are finally at their final stages of trial and error. My point is, the problem might be adaptation and format. Filmmakers must analyze these video games and put them on either animation or live action. Then analyze if it will better serve them to make it a movie or a TV show. It seems right now that studios are leaning more towards TV shows now. If you accidentally fuck up and adapt a video game in the wrong format, you will have a failure in your hands. That's how Nintendo was able to learn from their mistake. They noticed that Mario would not work in live action, so they did it again in animation. Boom, success. Assassin's Creed didn't work on movie format, so now it's getting a TV show. That's just how it is. Adapting media to film or TV is hard, but it can be extremely beneficial when done right. That's why a lot of Hollywood movies come from books. The idea is already proven to work, so now the problem is to adapt it in a good format. First it was books and plays, then comic books, now it's video game. My point is, Angry Birds 2 is Kino.